Hello everyone, in this video I'm gonna talk about the process of creating my new case for live streaming. How I managed to install the ATEM Mini Extreme ATX size PC and digital audio mixer MR18, all in one case measuring around 2x4 feet. Grab a coffee, we are ready to begin. The first thing to do is answer the question, why did I decide to build a new case for live streaming? And the answer is simple. It's time. Just look at how much equipment and actions is needed to conduct one live stream. ATEM Mini Extreme case, backpack with all necessary cables for connection, laptop for operating, ATEM software and stream, sound case with wireless microphones for audio. And we haven't even mentioned cameras, tripods, etc. Now let's see how many steps it takes to connect all of this. First, let's open the portable case with video switcher. Then take out the laptop. After that, connect the HDMI cable for displaying graphics, video or images, the audio interface and 1 gigabit port for internet connection. We will also need a Wi-Fi router to connect all the devices together and get an internet connection. The computer first and then the ATEM Mini Extreme. Next we can move on to power, the router, laptop and portable case. Now we can turn on the computer and only when we are ready to work. This is a pretty compact setup, but even so, the assembly process takes from 10 to 15 minutes. Moreover, such a setup is quite limited, especially when it comes to audio, and the huge number of cables on the table only complicates the workflow. That's why for a long time I was planning to place all the necessary equipment in one case while keeping its portability, and it looks like I found the solution. Instead of doing it every time on set, I decided to place all the necessary equipment in one medium-sized case. In total, it occupies one workspace, measuring 2x4 feet. Here's how it looks compared to my old case. As for the weights, the new case weighs 21.5 kilograms or 47 pounds without any equipment. For comparison, the old case assembled weighs only 5.5 kilograms, that's 4 times lighter. But I have a couple of ideas of how to shed the extra weight during the build. Now let's take a look at the new case and outline a rough plan of our actions. We need to replace the old wheels with new ones. Trust me, over the years of use, they have served their purpose. Restore the support legs. For some reason, the previous owner of this case decided to remove them, but I will need them in the future. I'm lucky he kept them and didn't throw them away. Replace the rear locks with hinges, so that the top lid opens instead of being completely removed as it currently does. And most importantly, and at the same time the most challenging task, is to completely rework the interior contents of the case. Let's not delay and get straight to work. First, we need to clear the workspace, remove all the materials what came with case. I set them aside, they might come in handy later. Next we remove all the glued foam inside the case. The process is quite boring but straightforward. Large pieces peels off easily, while smaller ones are removed with a screwdriver. If you plan to reuse any parts for your equipment, I recommend taking your time during disassembly to preserve the material as much as possible and avoid damage. After some time, the case has completely transformed. It was nothing, but I was quite pleased with the quality of material. The plywood is in good, dry condition without any serious damage, and that means we can move on to the next stage, removing the dividers. We won't need them in my configuration. These side dividers are easily unscrewed and peels off with a screwdriver. The same can be said for intermediate dividers, which require drilling out the rivets for removal. By removing all the excess, we already reduced the total weight by 10 kilograms, which is quite good. Let's deal with old wheels now. They definitely need to be replaced. I initially thought that the wheels mechanism was integrated into the case, and to replace them it would be enough to drill out the external attachment of these wheels. However, this wasn't the case, especially if you can find a similar set of wheels. The external attachment turned out to be just a metal overlay. I discovered this only at the very end, so I continued drilling until I removed these overlays. At some point, to avoid damaging anything, I decided to also drill out the corners that were preventing me from removing the metal overlays. I believe the drilling process is self-explanatory, so I will brief and speed up such moments in the video. After removing the metal overlays, it became clearer that both wheels were attached with same axle, which ran along the entire side wall. At least drilling out the corners wasn't in vain. With the help of pliers, I managed to pull out the axle and remove the worn out wheels. We will come back to this component a little later. For now, let's deal with rear lugs, which I need to replace with hinges. To do this, they also need to be drilled out and removed. When the lug itself easily comes off, I removed the remaining rivet remnants using a hammer, Phillips screwdriver and pliers. As for the new hinges, I was able to find them on Pan-Elcom website. I will leave a link to their online store because they have a wide selection of case assembly parts. As for the wheels, the set I ordered turned out to be larger than I expected. I even disassembled one wheel, but it was still too big. Therefore, I decided to turn to a craftsman who had already helped me with one of my projects. But for this, I needed to completely detach the side wall. That's exactly what I did. After a week, I received the side panel back with a perfect set of wheels commonly used in industrial equipment. Moreover, the craftsman gave me a new axle that I can install instead of the old one. However, it turned out to be slightly larger in diameter, so I had to use a hammer to fit it into place. Just look at how well the new wheels work. Unfortunately, due to their size, I couldn't reinstall the old metal overlays, but the case looks even better without them, and I decided to cover the empty holes with rivets. Next, it's time to reinstall the side wall. For better attachment, I used rivets and washers on the opposite side, and after doing the same on the other side, we can proceed to install the corner protectors, which we removed early. They protect the case from various types of damage. Next up is the installation of new hinges. With their help, the case lid will open at slightly greater than 90 degrees angle, just what I need. Additionally, the hinges have a support mechanism, so we don't have to worry about the lid simply tipping backwards and all the equipment on it falling off and getting damaged. The holes in the upper part aligned perfectly with the previous ones, which unfortunately cannot be said about the lower part. Only one lower hole matched. Using it, I secured the hinges in place to drill the remaining holes. For better fixation, I use small washers on the reverse side of the rivets. After installation, we checked the case for opening and closing. Well, it seems like everything is working as it should. Finally, we will install the support legs that the previous owner removed. It can be said that the case has undergone quite a transformation. We have completed the work on 3 out of 4 items on our list. And now we are ready for most challenging stage, the reconfiguration of the case's interior space for equipment installation, namely ATEM Mini Extreme Video Switcher, full-size ATX PC, motherboard, fans, power supply, CPU, RAM and GPU, digital audio mixer. Looking ahead, I will say that my initial plan differed significantly from what we have in the end. Mostly this is because I decided to use a more compact audio mixer, which freed up a significant portion of the case, into which I later decided to move the power supply unit. I also decided to use this part of the case for storing additional equipment such as keyboard and mouse. So don't be surprised that initially the contents of the case and arrangement of components will be different. To build the main part, the old shelf will be perfect. I plan to make 2 partitions from it, which will form the main space for the equipment. But before that, it needs to be completely disassembled, removing the guides and the old coating. Once the surface is cleaned, you can start making the partitions. To implement my idea, I plan to join 2 partitions at 90 degrees angle, this way creating the main space for the computer, ATEM Mini Extreme, power supply, etc. To safely cut the partitions to the required size, it's necessary to remove the metal corners and the old coating from the back side, which is exactly what I'm doing now. I didn't have any fasteners to secure the surface, so I asked my wife to help me. Using an electric jigsaw, we cut out 2 partitions. Be careful and don't attempt this if you are not familiar with power tools. The second partition needs to be shortened to leave space for wire connections. Moreover, thanks to this method of connection, I no longer have to worry about protecting the connectors from moisture, and they will always be covered and ready for use. We then connect the 2 partitions together using 2 aluminum brackets. Before installing the partition in place, I decided to restore the old lid. To do this, I needed to glue the lining, which had come loose in some places, and in some areas I had to remove it myself to install the new hinges. For gluing, I used super glue and regular tape. In this condition, I leave the lid for approximately 1 day, after which the tape can be removed. After installing the partition in place, it's necessary to mark the attachment points on each wall, as well as at the base. I plan to secure it using metal guides, so that the partition remains in place. To install the base guides, I drill the necessary holes and use rivets to secure them in place. Be careful when tightening the rivets. During tightening, one of my guides shifted, causing a slight bend in the entire rear partition. In my case, it's not critical, just slightly complicates the installation process of the entire partition. I decided to cut the new work surface from MDF board. It's strong enough and relatively light to support the video switcher and accessories I plan to use. Plus, as in previous build, we will cover the entire top surface with epoxy resin. Now comes the moment of truth. Will the surface fit the partition? It seems that it does, everything fits. After fitting, I set aside the work surface and sand all surfaces. By the end of this process, the top cover has completely dried and it's time to remove the tape. Next, we need to secure the new partition to the side walls. For this, I decided to use aluminum brackets that remained after dismantling this case. We will fix it with rivets on one side. For the other side, which attached to our partition, I decided to use bolts. This is necessary if we need to disassemble and reinstall the partition later. To mark the holes on the partition, I press the partition and the case wall tightly, otherwise the holes won't be precise. For convenience, I remove the partition to have more space to work with tool. Next, we need to modify the partition. Firstly, drill holes for fastening, and secondly, I need a fairly large hole to pass power, signal and audio cables. So I cut out a small corner measuring 2 by 4 cm and carefully sand the area where the cables will pass through. After that, we can proceed to mark the holes for connectors from the ATEM Mini Extreme, which I used in the previous case. In this case, it could have been skipped, and the wireless could be connected directly, but I prefer the first option. Moreover, this way HDMI connectors will last much longer, and the connection will be much more convenient. It's desirable to drill the holes from both sides to avoid wood chipping. I learned this only during the build process, which resulted in some uneven holes, but this is easily covered by the connectors itself and black paint. After an hour sanding, we move on to installing the connectors. Unfortunately, the bolts that came with them turned out to be small. To avoid buying new ones, I decided to make small recesses to be able to use the supplied bolts. To install the top lid, I decided to use simple hinges. For them, we will also need to mark the mounting holes. To do this, we measure an equal distance from both sides and mark the mounting positions. We repeat a similar process with the lid itself. The ATEM Mini will be placed in the upper left corner of the lid to leave enough space for the keyboard and mouse. This is necessary because I plan to use a full-size PC inside my case. To do this, I measure about 2 inches from the left and top sides. Then I place the lid from the previous case and mark the required area, ensuring that the distance from the edges of the lid to the switcher remains consistent. To cut the lid, I drill 4 holes on each side for jigsaw blade size, which makes it much more convenient to cut. I clean up all the rough edges with a sandpaper, and then trim all edges to fit the size of the switcher. If you don't have a precise tools like mine, it's always better to cut slightly less to have the option to adjust all edges in the future. For example, in my case, the switcher fits into the slot with excessive force, which shouldn't be the case. So I file the left edge again to ensure the switcher fits without additional force, but still maintains its position and doesn't fall out. My old PC, based on the server processor Xeon E5-2689 version 2, will perfectly handle managing software like ATEM software, OBS Studio, digital audio mixer and the streaming from the internet browser. Before installing this PC, in our case, it needs to be completely disassembled and some components replaced. First, we remove the graphics card and disconnect all power cables. Next, we move on to the PC cooling fans, some of which I plan to use for cooling inside the case. After disconnecting all power cables, we can move on to the power supply unit. I remove the motherboard together with installed RAM and CPU. Over time, the components have accumulated dust, so I decide to clean the computer before installing it in the new case. I will remove the thermal paste using a cotton pad and alcohol. Be careful not to leave cotton residue on the motherboard. After cleaning, we can proceed to install the new cooler. Due to the limited height space in the case, I need to replace the tall tower cooler with a more compact one. Although the amount are the same, I decide to use the included ones. Before installing the new cooler, it's necessary to apply thermal paste to CPU. There are different methods to do this, but I prefer to squeeze a small amount of thermal paste onto the center of the CPU and evenly distribute it over the entire surface of the CPU using a plastic card. Avoid squeezing too much thermal paste. After applying the thermal paste, we can install the cooler in place. I choose a low-profile cooler that can dissipate up to 120 watts of heat from the CPU. It's worth mentioning that because of the metal brackets I installed on the RAM, the cooler simply didn't fit, so I had to bend the first aluminum partition. Initially, I planned to install the motherboard in such a way as to create a single airflow from bottom to top. However, I completely forgot that I have a long version of GPU, and it simply blocked the entire flow of cold air. Conducting several tests with AIDA64, I found that under full CPU, GPU and RAM load, the computer overheats. I probably won't use this computer at 100% load, but I still wanted to have a temperature margin to ensure the stability of this computer operation and the safety of its components. Therefore, I decided to install the motherboard at a 90 degrees angle, so that the airflow passes sideways, which is what we need. For cooling the PC, I decided to use 4 120mm fans, each of which has automatic rotation adjustment depending on the PC temperature. 2 fans will be installed on the rear wall of our case and 2 on the front. Additionally, I will also install 2 60mm fans on the side of the case to cool the ATEM Mini Extreme. To be honest, these fans are too small for such case, and perhaps in the future I will replace them with 2 120mm fans, which I will connect to the PC motherboard. To install these 60mm fans, it's necessary to drill 4 holes for mounting and 1 large hole for air intake. But before that, it's necessary to mark this hole. From my experience of installing these fans on the previous case, I understood that it's better to make 1 large hole for air intake, rather than many small holes. This way the fans will produce significantly less noise. Since I cannot make a large hole right away, I decided to make 4 medium-sized holes with a twist drill. With this approach, I managed to make a large possible hole for the fans. It will be covered with a metal grid on the outside. To install 120mm fans, I decided to make several holes approximately 1 cm in diameter, but before that it's necessary to mark the position for mounting and the location of the fans themselves. After that, I carefully sand the entire surface, including the internal space. It's probably not necessary at all, but I wanted to make sure that nothing would obstruct the rotation of the fans. For power supply, I choose an extension cord with 6 sockets and 8 USB ports. 4 of them are USB-A and 4 are USB-C. Such a set is necessary for powering 2 USB fans and monitors that I plan to install in this case. To secure it in place, I decided to use 2 wooden blocks, which I will attach directly to the case itself, and then attach the extension cord to them in the designed spots. I also decided not to change the connector of the cable, and its length suits me perfectly, so I will simply run it along the side wall. 2 wooden blocks will be installed during furniture dowels. I made 2 holes each in both the case and the wooden blocks. As for the blocks themselves, I made a small notch in one of them, 1 cm wide, to run the power cable along the side wall of the case. The second block had to be shortened by a quarter, so that it wouldn't interfere with the power supply, which I remind you will be moved to another location towards the end of this project, but at that time it was necessary. Before installation, I checked that the blocks and the cable fit into their places, after which I glued the furniture dowels and foam padding. I installed the foam padding to create support for the power supply, although it could have been done without it. With the power supply sorted out, I can now prepare the surface for future painting. To do this, I borrowed a grinder and cleaned all surfaces as much as possible, as well as removed residues of old glue. To secure the intake fans, I need to install an aluminum angle, which will serve as an upper mount and additional support for the working surface. Moreover, this will add strength to the case itself. The next and perhaps the most challenging stage for me was preparing the holes for installing the monitors. The internal surface of the lid is soft, which made it difficult for me to accurately measure the mounting points. I also decided not to do this from outside, as the internal distance is shorter than the external one, and the monitors themselves have practically no distance between each other when installed vertically. After some time, I managed to make the necessary holes. Not perfectly, but they have been functioning reliably for several months now. However, I encountered another problem. Due to the internal coating, I simply couldn't see the drilled holes of bolts, which greatly complicated the process of installing the monitors. Before painting and filling, it's essential to do a wet cleanup to remove all dirt and dust after work. As per tradition, we will entrust Tessa with powdering the epoxy resin onto the work surface. For the pour, we completely covered the surface with black color, and then Tessa powdered the epoxy resin in space film style. This method is very convenient because we get a smooth and beautiful surface for work, which is resistant to damage and easily to clean. Meanwhile, I decided to work on the internal finishing of the entire case. After covering all the aluminum surfaces, we can proceed to painting. For this, I will also use black paint. If desired, you can apply 2 layers of black paint to the case to achieve a decent shade, but I don't need this because I plan to use a carpet covering. It's lightweight, durable and easy to clean in case of any stains. As a bonding material, I use a super glue, so each glued area needs to be pressed well and left for several hours. In this way, I completely covered the entire internal surface except for the space where the computer motherboard is installed. To secure the vertical sections, I use tape, clips and wooden planks. Once everything has dried, we can remove the tape and our updated internal surface is ready for assembly. Before that, of course, we need to completely disassemble the previous case. It's hard to believe that I was once able to fit all this inside. In short, we will need the ATEM Extreme switcher, a portable monitor, connectors, cooling system and some of the power supply components that I used in this build. All of this will transition into the new case and continue its life there. The case itself, along with remaining equipment, has already been sold and serving its new owner. As for me, having gathered all the components together, I am ready to install this equipment into the new case. Instead of showing you the entire process of installing connectors, I've decided to visually present my connection scheme. We can move on to installing 2 exhaust fans, simply because it's much easier to do so in this position. Finally, tighten each bolt. It's important not to overdo it, otherwise the fan won't spin. When we install the panel back in its place. Next up are the fans for cooling the ATEM Mini Extreme, which I mount on the side wall of the case. Then the power strip, which I install on the familiar wooden plugs, and I run the cable along the side wall and through a corner hole to the rear wall of the case. Now it's time for the fans for blowing in cold air. In the video I demonstrated the installation of only 1 fan, but in the final assembly there's gonna be 2. The installation process is exactly the same. As I mentioned earlier, the final position of motherboard differs from what you can see in the video, so we won't focus on that yet. Let's smoothly move on to the tightening our partition. Then I installed the 2 monitors in their places. For this there are 4 holes on the back panel for mounting 10 by 10 cm, and I installed and screwed in 4 bolts into pre-drilled holes. All that's left is to hit the holes that you physically can see. After several attempts and couple of hours, I finally managed to install the monitors in their place. If you have any ideas of how they can be secured more conveniently, let me know in the comments. The workstation was fully ready for installation. Then I decided to install a second aluminum support to maintain the work surface. On top of that, I also decided to attach foam pads. This was necessary to level the work surface. As I mentioned earlier, due to overheats issue, I simply had to rotate the motherboard by 90 degrees. I decided to simplify the process of installing the motherboard at 90 degrees angle. There's nothing complicated there, drilling and installing support legs for motherboard. I was very lucky that even in such position everything fits and works perfectly, especially regarding the size of the graphic card. Meanwhile, I finished installing the connector for the fans. To secure the graphic cards and prevent the PCI connector from being ripped out during transportation, I installed such an aluminum bracket, which I attached directly to the partition itself. Now the graphics card definitely won't go anywhere. By the way, at this point I've already replaced the exhaust fans and moved the previous ones to intake, so now I have 4 fans, and the most observant ones surely noticed that the power supply unit is already in different location. I decided to place it right behind the audio mixer. In the end, I opted for the MR18 instead of PCG TQ12, so I freed up a significant amount of space within the dimension of this case. In the future, I will also cover this area with another work surface and show you some videos of the finished solution at the very end. Now we can move on to wiring. I prefer when the cables are neatly arranged and easily to find in case of any problems. Finally, the moment I've been waiting for most. We connect with power and hope that everything works. And I would like to say that everything worked out, but when I connected everything and decided to check the sound, I heard this. Don't worry, I have already fixed this issue, but you still can share your guesses in the comments below, and in the next one I will share what the problem was and how to fix it. Bye!